Lauren Laughs, a podcast dedicated to lore, Olympus, and Greek mythology. In this episode, we're discussing chapter 174, titled Double Windsor, Open Plots and Cookies, and the final part of the Greek myth of the taking of Persephone. Find us on SoundCloud as Lauren Laughs Podcast and YouTube under Lauren Laughs. I'm Greg, also known as King Pluto 97.
And I'm Sarah, also known as Hekate.
So we start the episode with Hades walking with determination, and he's stopped by Hekate, who asks where he is going. He says that he's going to see his brother, and she tells him not to lose his temper. Hades enters the room in semi-big mode, and is obviously very angry. Emerging through the door. Previously, Zeus was complaining about the spread of food, which is very trivial, and Poseidon was trying to tie his tie. Now, with the outfits that Zeus and Hades wear, Zeus is wearing all white and Hades is wearing all black. So they're wearing almost identical but opposite outfits to each other, but that's interesting because Hades has the epithet Dark Zeus, because he's the opposite of the king of the gods. So Hades runs towards Zeus and has a claw hand, and he starts to have stars appearing on his cheeks. Poseidon tries to stop him, but he's not really into stopping Hades. Not really, he just does it. So Hades asks Zeus why a reporter thinks that Zeus is marrying Persephone off to Apollo, and Apollo speaks up because he is, and Zeus admonishes him by saying not now. And Apollo continues to egg on Hades, who approaches him and says, "You've been brutalizing my wife for months." He seems to have gotten carried away. He's panicking. Which seems a little bit confusing and strange, and Apollo seems confused and maybe slightly worried, although you can't tell on his face. And another thing is Apollo's outfit. He's wearing a white outfit and a cape, almost like you would if he were a royal prince, but he isn't really. And it's revealed that Apollo did actually tell the press about the marriage petition, even though Hera disregarded it and ripped it up into pieces and laughed at him. And it appears that Zeus may have promised him something, just to get Demeter that was in the birdcage, to let him believe that the marriage was a done thing and that he was going to allow Persephone to be married to Apollo. But like we mentioned before, Zeus isn't a diplomat. He just wants to get over as soon as possible. He wants to make himself look good. Like, any kind of diplomacy seems to be more Hades kind of a thing. So Apollo is told to leave by Zeus because he's antagonizing his brother, but again, I think Zeus literally did it because that's making him look bad. And Hades asks Zeus to explain himself. And he admits that he's fully lying to Apollo, but even Poseidon, he doesn't trust him, he questions him. We don't really know about the deal he's made with Apollo or what he might have promised. Again, he's a terrible diplomat, so is that something that he's using to punish Hades and Persephone? Is there something more to it? So when Zeus ends the conversation, Hades says that, Persephone is afraid of Apollo.
So we pan over to Demeter and Persephone talking. Persephone's asking Demeter whether or not she's a fertility goddess, and of course Demeter's obviously worried about why she's asking this question. Persephone says that a select few in their community seems to be under the impression that she's a fertility goddess. As she says this, she also looks down at the brooch on her shoulder. Demeter tries to change the subject and continues to treat her like a child, though she does at one point kind of quickly say she'd like to know who is under that impression. Persephone tries to get her mother to tell her more about being a fertility goddess. She says, "It's not the end of the world if I'm growing a few extra carrots, right?" She mentions that assumptions about her vary greatly, and ultimately she outright asks her mother if there's more to it. Again, Demeter tries to minimize the situation and says that it's just an old wives' tale, and says this while she's pointedly not looking at Persephone. Persephone tells her mother that Apollo seems to be under the impression that she is a fertility goddess, and for some reason, very valuable to him. She floats up to Demeter's face and says, "I don't like it when someone else knows more about me than I do." Yet again, Demeter tries to minimize and says, "You're too young to be concerned about this," and claims that it's her responsibility to take care of Persephone. Persephone points out that she is a goddess and deserves to live a life uncoddled just like any other immortal being. And finally, we pan over to the court. Zeus tells them that they have a right to a community-appointed lawyer. Zeus tries to tell her that she waived that right to nominate her own attorney, but Persephone outsmarts him and says since the notice was given to her about the trial less than 72 hours in advance, that she has the right to select her own attorney. And ultimately, she nominates Hades.
Chapter, Persephone seems to demonstrate that she has a very great understanding of diplomacy and law. So one of the cookies could be that, even when she was in the video conference and Zeus scared her, that could be a nod to her going back to university and also studying law as well as agriculture, which would be very fitting if she becomes like Hades, sort of like queen in training. And again with the opposite outfits, do they symbolize Zeus being the king of the gods in the light, and Hades, also known as Dark Zeus, in the darkness of the underworld, which is what we mentioned earlier?
Is Zeus keeping the Apollo wedding petition in his back pocket as a way to punish Hades or Persephone? We also question whether or not there's more to the deal with Apollo, because we haven't necessarily seen their discussion yet. And in terms of keeping the petition in his back pocket, I'm wondering if, as we get towards the later part of the trial, we'll run into a situation where Zeus has to try and pull out a number of different, cards to try and... the next thing we were going to speak about is a big, hot topic. Everyone's been discussing this. Do we think that Persephone and Hades are now married? Just want to mention that there is a theory about Hades' dream with the little prince being a prophecy sent by the fates. So perhaps they made him call Persephone his wife in the same way, as a nod to the future that they are fated to have. So, do you think that Persephone and Hades are now married?
I mean, the whole of the underworld seems to treat it as if, they're married or they're going to be king and queen very soon. It's almost like everyone kind of before a royal wedding, there's all this hype and everyone can't wait. You can sort of feel it. So maybe that's kind of the fates kind of sending out the feeling of this great prophecy is going to happen. But it seems like everyone in the sort of Olympus kind of doesn't believe in all the hype. So it's possible that they could be married, and honestly, I don't find it as annoying as the pomegranate theory, so I'm going to say that it's a possibility that they're married, because they've been playing house, as Apollo said, but, they've spent so much time together, they've been rather, emotionally raw and, intimate, in a small space with each other, not necessarily, sexually, but, emotionally. So it's obvious that they act as if they're married, and again, that could work in with the Fates prophecy. So it's possible that, in the underworld's view, and, the citizens themselves, I think they probably do see Hades and Persephone as married, but it's not, like, official by Hera. And, I think everyone is just seeing the pomegranate brooch and thinking, like, that's a symbol of Hades. Like, what has he done? Are they married? And then he called her his wife. And, you know, obviously, Apollo might tell the press about that, and that might, you know, make it look worse on Persephone and Hades, but we don't know. So, everyone is still wondering what that means, you know, especially Demeter, because she starts to panic about the fact that Persephone's been wearing the symbol of Hades, like, underworld, his kingdom, his brand, like, it's essentially, like, protection for her, but it's not in the way that, Demeter may be overthinking about it.
Right. I tend to, I agree with you that, they may or may not, well, let me put it to you this way, I wouldn't be surprised if they were married, but I will say that I do wonder if maybe Hades just slipped up or something. Maybe he's starting to, maybe one of their plans is to get married. You know what I mean? Like something, again, that they're kind of keeping in their back pocket. Similar to what we spoke about with the...
They don't mention it. I mean...
Similar to what we...
Hades was like... Sorry. I don't want to keep interrupting you.
It's fine. Similar to what we spoke about with, like, the cloak of invisibility. You know, that it might be...
Just a theory.
Like something that they, you know, Hades mentioned several times, you know, we've planned for the worst. It sounds like they've got, you know, a well thought out plan to try and handle anything that might happen, hopefully. So hopefully. It's possible that maybe they have that sitting kind of in their back pocket, you know, as an option.
I mean... It's very possible. Like I said, it does look like the cape Hades is wearing. It's the invisibility coat, because it's sort of that greyish-black colour. You know. But, like, again, we totally don't know. This could be complete theory, but it's fun. So, you know, Demeter doesn't even seem to like what Persephone is wearing to the trial, because it looks rather grown up and professional. She's wearing the outfit with the protection of Hades, and like the button hat, and the way she dealt with the press and everything is very grown up. I mean, she's very scared, obviously, but the way she's acting, it's like she's completely independent, and that's not something that Demeter has ever seen her be, obviously, because Demeter is very controlling. You know, perhaps she's kind of thinking that, you know, Persephone looks like a young adult goddess, and not the innocent girl that she knew in the Peplos on her land that she could control. And then, obviously, we mentioned last episode that Demeter might think Hades is as bad as his brothers, especially Zeus.
But we also continue to see Demeter check, you know, the outfit that she's wearing, and that Persephone is wearing, and seems to kind of obsess over Persephone's figure. You know, previously she mentioned her weight, and, you know, it just seems to really be focusing on the outfit that she's wearing. Is she looking to see whether or not Persephone's pregnant? You know, who knows? But we do notice that, you know, Demeter continues to look at that brooch as well, too. We're wondering whether or not Demeter sees that as Hades having control over Persephone, you know, that maybe Demeter no longer has anymore. Whether or not that means marriage, whether or not that's just, you know, he's just taking control over one, you know, tricked her. I mean, who knows what that might be, you know, what she might be thinking. But, yeah, again, she continues to kind of obsess over what she's wearing and what she looks like now, and the brooch and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then she's obsessing, and, like, I don't know whether that she's, because we mentioned, like, her trauma, perhaps she's, like, trying to compare Hades to his brothers, because, like, everyone seems to have, like, a very set mindset of the kings grouped together, so they always think that Hades is exactly like Zeus. And I think that might be what may be running through Demeter's head, because she continues to try and minimize or change the subject about Persephone being a fertility goddess, and maybe that will, like, affect the trial, because if she does reveal that Persephone is a fertility goddess, you suddenly have not only Hades being a threat, but also Zeus and Apollo, and that means that, like, what shred of control Demeter has is no longer hers.
One thing we also probably need to mention, something I think we referenced in the previous episode, is the way that Demeter handled the trauma of Kronos. And maybe she sees, Hades looks the most like Kronos, and she may see Hades as a, an equal to or a version of or whatever of Kronos, and there might be some fear there that the only reason why Hades wants her is because she's a fertility goddess. And what that might potentially mean.
Yeah, and also, like, with Hades as her lawyer, obviously he isn't there to make the third vote on whether Persephone and Demeter get punished as a whole. So, like, that just leaves, like, Poseidon and Zeus, and obviously that's quite an unbalanced vote. So, another thing is, we don't know who the third vote may be. Some people were thinking maybe that it would be Hera, because she had the whole vision that started the ball rolling, almost, of Persephone's rape. So, like, even though Zeus doesn't take stock in the visions at all, like, whether Persephone would be judged by the Fates, or Hera, or Hekate, or somebody that would have, like, an outlooking view on, like, what has happened and what might happen to help judge, because obviously Themis is pregnant and can't do that.
I think it would end up being some kind of outside source, someone who's not familiar with or not a fan of Persephone at this point. And it sounds like everyone we've sort of spoken about in one way, shape, or form, they know who Persephone is and seem to, at bare minimum, know who she is and seem to like her and that sort of thing. So one of the other questions we had was, how will having Hades as her lawyer maybe change the trial overall? And as you mentioned, it may change up, who's the decision makers, but, will it mean, a change to, like the legal strategy, or I wonder how that might work.
I mean, because one of the things that Zeus totally did not think about when he was king is that Hades has, like, all of the technological power. He has, like, the best grasp on, like, diplomacy and law. I assume he probably studied it because, he's got all the law, the lawyers, like, studying law in his kingdom. So, obviously, in order to be, like, a good judge, you would have needed to study law. And, I don't think for one moment he thought that, like, he would be going against his own brother, who is, like, a good lawyer, and essentially, like, his job is to be king and also judge of the dead, so I don't think for one moment he thought that he would be going against such a good legal team.
So the next segment that we're moving into is the myth segment. We're discussing when Persephone first interacted with Apollo. As a side note, I think you and I talked about this, that we haven't necessarily found a really good myth to share that includes, an interaction with Persephone and Apollo. And then the other thing, too, is, of course, the Apollo and Persephone Apollo raping Persephone, that isn't necessarily, from the myths. That's something that's unique to lore Olympus.
I think it's been amended quite a lot because obviously from lore Olympus that Rachel's Smythe made it so Hades is not Persephone's uncle and Zeus is not her father.
Right.
And obviously, because in some versions of the myth, Demeter single-handedly has Persephone as a goddess, because that's possible. But in someone's, Zeus is her father, that means Hades is also her husband and her uncle, which isn't present in Elo for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
It has enough triggering content and does it quite well in our opinion, so I think that's what Rachel removed in order to have the good the storytelling points.
Right. So, at 14, Persephone, who is the joy of her mother, she reached the age of marriage. Eros, the god of love, and all of his mischief, shot all of the gods with his golden arrow, causing them to fall in love with the beautiful Persephone. All of the male gods then lined up for their chance to take the hand of Demeter's daughter in marriage. Hermes asked for her hand and offered his golden staff as a bridal gift. Apollo also asked Persephone for her hand and offered his prized possession, the lyre his brother Hermes gave him. Ares was willing to give up his sneaking around with Aphrodite to marry his father's daughter. He offered a spear and a cuirass, armor that covers the torso, and other things. What girl wouldn't love that? Even Hephaestus, the god of forges, wanted to divorce his wife Aphrodite, who was caught fooling around with his brother Ares. And he threw his hat into the ring for the hand of Persephone. He offered a necklace that he had made in his forge.
Demeter was distraught over the fact that so many suitors were after her young daughter. All of those who applied, she was especially worried about her innocent girl ending up with the crippled Hephaestus, so she went to see the astrologer Astraeus, who was the son of the Titans Krios and Euryba. So, after hearing Persephone's predicament, Astraeus considered Persephone's time of birth and the alignments of the planets. He told Demeter that she would need to beware her daughter's groom would steal the girl, but not before another would steal her innocence. So Demeter then devised a plan to protect Persephone, so she gathered her up in the chariot and fled to Sicily. She found a cave and hid Persephone away, who then spent her days weaving as Athena had taught her. Demeter left Drachans at the entryway to watch over her daughter while she returned to her duties, tending to the agriculture of the mortal realm. Persephone, in the meantime, took without a care in the world. Now, I don't know if it's canon because obviously it's mythology, but, Hades isn't mentioned at all in this myth. But I do think because Eros shot all of the gods with his golden arrow, I think this is probably around the sort of time where you have, the kidnapping of Persephone, because it mentions that she would be stolen, but also losing her innocence, so I think it happens, slightly before she gets kidnapped. Because it always mentions that she's being guarded by something. Whether it's other nymphs or, dragons, which are kind of dragon lizard type monsters. But we don't know. And again, Zeus isn't Persephone's father at all in the series. So it's different depending on where you were going to get your source from. It was actually kind of difficult to find a myth that even had Hades mentioned, Demeter and Persephone mentioned, that weren't just Persephone being stolen by Zeus giving her away to Hades because he's her father. So it was very awkward trying to find this segment of the myth. So I think that's the only bit we have for the myth because it's only part of it. the rest of it isn't really canon for anything that we need to talk about with Olympus. Because it doesn't mention Apollo apart from the first part of it.
Just double checking if there was anything else. I'm wondering, you know more about this than I do. Is there anything else you think we might need to speak about in relation to that theory about Hades' dream with the little prince? Hades' dream with the little prince being a prophecy sent by the fates. We mentioned that perhaps that might have kind of led him to calling Persephone his wife. It might have just been a slip-up. Or it could just maybe be a nod to the future that they have fated together. But I think we wanted to kind of explain this a little bit more, and I think you wanted to do that.
Yeah, so, when we're, in between, Series 1 and Series 2, there's a recap episode that, actually kind of shows how the fates work. That, it's all on, VHS tapes, and it's, developed film that the fates kind of oversee and protect, kind of ye old blockbuster movies. But, the way that it sort of, fades in, and we see, it's very blurry around the edges, and, Hades is, for once having the happiest dream that he's ever had, because most of his dreams are all related to his trauma, his PTSD of being eaten alive by his father, or, something that, would get somebody he cares about hurt. But, in this one, there's a very clear, fade in, fade out kind of a style, but when there was an episode about the fates, it was very this shows them fading in and doing what they do best, and then they watch the catch up that we see as a reader in the very sort of fade in, fade out with the main points. So we have Hades' dream is that he and Persephone are married, and they have a child, and that child is getting to be, I guess 6 to 8 months old, nearly a year. And then it seems that they're going somewhere. It's something that they do routinely as a king and a queen. It's very established, and even when it fades out, Hades tries to convince himself, that'll never happen. But it seems to be almost a pattern, almost like when Zeus was trying to convince himself, oh no, Persephone can't be a fertility goddess because that's an old wives' tale, and Hades kind of convinces himself the same way. He's like, this can't be true, I'm imagining things that'll never happen. But again, the fates seem to have shown him that, and they also made him call Persephone his wife, sort of say, no, this is your fate, stop fighting it, because he's been waiting so long. And they seem to favour him a little bit, even when they gave him the original, tape of how he met Persephone, simply because he'd been drinking, and he'd forgotten it, and also Demeter had a hand in making him forget the entire first encounter that he'd had with Persephone in the mortal realm when he'd gone to visit Hekate.
Thing about, how he doesn't necessarily come to them all the time. Zeus comes to them all the time asking for tapes or memories or for things to be erased or whatever. So maybe that's kind of part of why they like him so much, is because this was really the first time.
Zeus kind of has an ulterior motive, because he just wants memories of the people he's slept with and cheated on Hera, whereas Hades is okay, well, I respect these fates, because we see when we start to see Hades as a young god, when he first became king, the people that were there were the fates. And we see the Furies, and we see Hekate, so obviously they are older than Hades, and he respects them greatly, as he should as king. But I think that's why they sort of have a soft spot. They're sort of nudging him on, he deserves this. This is his fate, and it's, we can make an exception for him, is what one of the fates says. So it's obvious that they are really trying to push him towards the fate that he's meant to have.